have with us here Rajiv Malhotra, an old friend, a writer, a thinker, a man who's reinvented himself many times. He started his life as one of those IT geniuses from India who set up IT ventures in the US. But for the last decade or more, Rajiv has given up attempt to earn more money, which he did plentiful for the first 20 years of his life in the US, and has since then been a full-time writer, an academic, though outside academia, and constantly on the lecture circuit. I've known Rajiv for over a decade now. Rajiv?
90s.
Pleasure.
Just the late 90s.
That's right. Pleasure meeting you in this form and format. And I'm going to ask you, Rajiv, to tell me, why is it that from being a very successful entrepreneur in the US, at the cutting edge of things, why did you suddenly take this turn and decide to give all that up in favor of challenging Western academia, especially those in the social sciences?
Well, first I want to thank you for this, because I feel that you have a very long history of knowing me in many different ways. So it's very interesting that I'm being interviewed by you, and I think that's very exciting for me also. So thank you for that. Regarding the question why I started doing this, you know, some things happen, very personal things happen, spiritual things happen in my life, which led me to shift in who I am and what I want to do, and not want to make money and accumulate wealth and all that, give that up in fact, give up the rat race, but I didn't realize that I'd be entering a different kind of rat race. I didn't realize that. It is true, but you know, once you get into discourse, challenging discourse, you're going to ruffle feathers, and that also comes from being a scientific mind. So you look at things analytically, you analyze it, you keep your cool, you give them logic, you give them data, and often they don't know how to handle it because they're expecting a different sort of person. People often expect either I'm a very ultra-orthodox Hindu and therefore they have to treat me in a certain way, or they think that this guy will easily lose his cool and go very bombastic and they can bring me down with some logic. So this analytical training, business training also helps in that respect. So I think a series of, and being an entrepreneur, you're on your own. There's nobody out there. You're not.
But why this interest in Hinduism and India?
Well,
why India obsession? Did it come via Hinduism or the other way around?
Well, I've had a personal practice which I've kept and kept evolving, which is a deep meditative practice, which involved a guru at one time, many gurus over many lineages, learning many things, and also self-study.
Even while you were
yes,
in the IT business?
Yes, yes. So I've had that. Now that inner yoga at some point in time turns into an outer expression through action. So that I call yoga off the mat. So yoga on the mat is what you sit and do 1 hour. What do you do the other 23 hours? You can't sort of turn the switch, say, okay, no longer yoga, I've done it for the day. That is in action. So that is what you are doing in the actual Kurukshetra is a kind of yoga also. So that is what I'm getting to do. So I think my Swadharma is to do that.
So why this obsession? What happened sitting in America?
So what happened is a set of circumstances led me to feel that, you know, I've had enough, I've made enough. Probably a person shouldn't accumulate more than their fair share. They should probably return back to society. So a whole lot of these idealistic sort of insights and expansions of consciousness came. But it wasn't at that time that I knew I was going to do what I'm now doing. So I set up a foundation, and the first stage of the foundation was wisdom and compassion.
This was the Infinity Foundation.
The Infinity Foundation. That's a Buddhist idea, wisdom and compassion. So compassion is charity, you know, so a lot of AIDS Foundation and women's shelters and food shelters and children's, those kind of things, which is very commonly done by a lot of people. But I couldn't offer anything original. My $1 was as good as somebody else's $1. It wasn't $5 because of my knowledge or expertise. But the wisdom side, where I started giving grants and funding other people, I quickly realized that there is an opportunity for me to be adding value. I can add value. Because the people in the wisdom area, I felt by and large were not very provocative, not very innovative, they were not shaking things up. They were sort of, there was an old stodgy system. And coming from technology, I was used to shaking things up, and something that will change the whole way things are working.
But why did you want to shake things up? Why this interest in India, Hinduism, and the way Western academia handles it?
Okay, that evolves gradually over time. I start giving grants, and
But by then you were already obsessed with changing the way India is perceived, the way Hinduism is perceived.
Yeah, I had seen.
Was it not?
I had seen. Yeah, I had seen some of it in my kids' school classes. The way they're teaching, world cultures and world systems. That India is not on par with other countries, whether it's Hinduism or just India in general. The way they teach China, for example, or Europe, or even many other countries. And also when it comes to teaching world religions, which is a very big thing in the US, we don't teach it because we think secularism should exclude teaching world religions, but they do teach world religions. I found that Hinduism was completely full of what I call caste, cows and curry stereotypes and Hindu phobia. There's so much Hindu phobia, and that is true today, and no one was talking about it. It was considered politically incorrect to even raise the issue, because Indians themselves are so ignorant and not able to stand up and challenge that if I were the voice who would do that, my fellow Hindus would break ranks with me and feel embarrassed that I'm doing all this.
No, wait. There's talk of Islam phobia.
Yes.
For the very simple reason that a significant section, a small but significant section, has taken to terrorism and has made its life's ambition to disrupt Western hegemony through terror attacks, through defining themselves in hostile opposition to the West. Now, Hindus have never done that. They're not really a menace to anyone. Even in the US, they are considered a very docile and very well-adjusted minority. Why would anybody have Hindu phobia?
Yeah, I coined the term Hindu phobia because there is a term called Islamophobia. Long before 9/11, if you did a search on Islamophobia, you'd get millions of hits. But Hindu phobia was non-existent as a category that you couldn't even search. So the terror causing Islamophobia is a sort of recent thing that has intensified Islamophobia. But Islamophobia also existed even before it was associated with terror. At least the Muslims perceived more than the Hindus perceived that they were not being seen properly.
Yeah.
The Hindus didn't have that consciousness that there is bias against us until it had to be brought out. Now the reason for this, what I'm calling Hindu phobia, goes back to missionaries, goes back to colonial times, and our tradition doesn't fit the Western idea of what a religion should be.
But would you not say it's Hindu disdain? What you see in missionary writing is not really phobia, but disdain.
It is Hindu disdain. That may be a better term, but it's a more. I coined Hindu phobia to match Islamophobia as a topic.
No, there is, on the one hand, a certain anger and annoyance at the fact that Hindus fail to prove themselves to be easy converts. India is one of the few places where missionary activity remained very marginal up to 1947. If anything, I mean, there have been more conversions, I think, post-1947 than before.
And in the last 10 years more.
And in the last 10 years. So there is a great deal of annoyance, therefore, at the caste system. Because if anything that the British couldn't break through was this jati, biradri, the hold of the caste system, which prevented people from easily succumbing to conversion activity. But there isn't phobia because Hindus never retaliated with the kind of anger against missionary activity in the way that many in the Muslim world.
Yeah. See, the issue from the West should not be limited to, this is a common thing that Hindus have, that everything is based on Christian missionaries. But the secular left, the so-called Enlightenment people, are very, very much a problem also from my point of view. The issues from the secular point of view are probably far worse, because there is that pretense of neutrality which is not there. And the reason is that what we call secularism is not really neutral. There is a lot of Christianity, Judeo-Christianity built into the categories. The nature of time, the nature of the self, the whole idea of morality. It's sort of, without reference to God, some of the similar ideas are still there. So what the West considers to be non-religious enlightenment secular space is still a continuation of the same pattern of thinking. And so the issues towards Hinduism remain and even intensify from the non-Christian side of the West as well. So it is the Christian conversion is a very explicit agenda. The other kind of Westerner who's a very modern, postmodern, into human rights, has a certain set of what I call Western universalism. In my book, Being Different, I define Western universalism as a set of categories and as a lens through which the West sees the world. And in that, Hinduism is a challenge. It's difficult to break it down. It is important to map it and digest it into the Western universalism. So that's the sort of confrontation which has been going on with Hinduism.
But coming back to the story of how your children were being taught,
yes,
India studies or Hinduism,
right,
while in school, apparently that was a major trigger point.
One, and I'm
but
always...
give me examples.
Well,
not everybody knows.
Yeah, an example is when they were teaching cultural studies and world religions, I would always engage and look at the textbooks and go and give talks to the school, and that's where I realized that the sort of teaching they are giving is Hinduism as a source of problems rather than thinking of it as a solution. So and at the same time I was very aware that from the same Hinduism they are appropriating a lot of things like yoga, like meditation, like vegetarianism. A lot of cool things were becoming part of liberal white culture. To be liberal white, if you define what they do, a lot of things are Hindu that are considered liberal, cutting edge, cool pop culture, white. And yet the same source, when they are teaching it, they are not acknowledging any of those things. It's like all that they needed that's good has been removed from it, and now it is this caste cow's curry kind of thing. So that's
even
what
curry has become acceptable.
Curry is kind of, but that is the exotic part. Okay, there is something exotic and nice mixed in with all the problems, So there is mosquitoes, there's snakes, there's cows, there's monsoon, and
caste.
Caste. Yeah, caste, and there is sati, dowry. This is the whole package. So this stereotyping, which is the work of a lot of anthropologists, a lot of human rights people, a lot of lenses that are superimposing. Now, if you go back to American history, the way the whites saw Native Americans is very similar to what was projected upon India. They saw it as a frontier, which was wild people, savages, and we, the whites, are bringing civilization. And the frontier is the place of encounter, where civilization takes over the savages and civilizes them. And those who cannot be civilized have to be dealt with and exterminated. So there were this model of the frontiermen, and the frontiermen were two kinds, good cops and bad cops. The good cops would go and marry and become local and wear their clothes and dance like them and have campfires and learn their language, but ultimately they would subvert. They were not long-term sustainable in that way, and therefore in the end they were facilitating what the bad cop would do, which is a ruffian tough guy would come and beat them up. So this also became a pattern for the British. A lot of British were good cops. There were a lot of people, and still are. They were extremely Indianized and trying to help Indians.
And had spent a lifetime studying, working, creating dictionaries,
mapping the
place,
mapping the whole place, mapping the terrain.
The way that we haven't bothered to actually do
ourselves. So they came and mapped us using their frame of reference, their sense of space, their sense of time, their sense of community. And Hinduism also mapped into their idea what a religion should be, looking for clergy, looking for books. So several aspects of our tradition were not even studied because there was nothing equivalent to that in Christianity. So I've always been a person, now back to my story, I've always been, even in my business life, never stopped being an observant of culture, because I had ventures in different parts of the world. at one point in about 20 countries. And so wherever I would go, I would spend a certain amount of time trying to understand what is Poland's history, or what is their religion here, what is controversial here, what goes on. So even in my business dealings and negotiations, I could understand what are the hot buttons of this place. Now that is something I learned in my corporate career, because one of the things I did was at ITT, where when we were making a delegation to Japan, and I was part of that, we had corporate training on etiquette and how you bow, how much you bow, who bows first, you or the other side. And it depends on relative ranking and seniority and also age. So all these little subtleties, I found this is amazing. These people really, and then I thought, you know, maybe the East India Company must be where it all started. And that is where the Indology starts. Indology starts doing this sort of thing for the East India Company officers before they come to India, which is exactly what people like ITT were doing to people like me before sending them to Japan or sending them to China. So I was very impressed by that. And I was saying, you know, Indians should do this. When we go and do business in foreign countries, we should be able to do this to them. So I started in my own amateurish way, doing what later I learned is called anthropology. So I was doing anthropology of white people while I was working with them. And I found this to be a business tool. I found that I could operate on multiple levels. In one level, I am just being the cool businessman talking like them. And another level, I'm sitting back and saying, you know, he's doing it because of this, that. Just like they have a caste, cows and curry idea of us, I had this kind of mapping of who they are. So in a sense, I was doing these things even before I started the Infinity Foundation. And I found this to be useful as a business tool. I was able to manage better, be able to talk back, able to hold my own. And you know, that was an age, that was a time I'm talking about before the mid-90s, when Indians hadn't done so well. So it's not like there were no, now today an Indian doesn't have to face the same prejudice because the identity, the map has changed, you know, and the way Indians are perceived has changed very recently. This is very recent. I'm talking about a time when...
This is post-globalization.
This is
where
post-globalization.
Indian businessmen, corporates actually went and outperformed in the West.
Right. I was able to luckily get in very high places much before all this happened. It was very unconventional. So I had to use my own tricks and improvise and be a little innovative. And so with no training in social sciences, I was in a sense an amateur anthropologist.
Okay. Now coming to your own writing, you've done 4 major books: Being Different, Breaking India, Indra's Net, and Invading the Sacred. Invading the Sacred was your first one, right?
Yes.
Could you briefly describe each one of them before I ask you my next question?
Okay, great. Invading the Sacred was actually written by other editors, but about my fights and discourse and various problems and interactions with Western scholars of Hinduism. And this is where I felt that they were going way too far in Freudianizing and making disparaging comments and interpretations of Hindu texts, Hindu gurus, Hindu symbols, deities, festivals, all of that. So this was a lot of writings I had in response to Westerners. I would go to their conferences, I would critique their dissertations, I would go online, and I would be invited to panels and so on. And then people compiled this into that book. And it became quite an important book because it shook up the Hindu diaspora and people in India. It was published by Rupa. The second one was Breaking India. Breaking India is not about Hinduism, but it's about India. And actually that's quite relevant to what I think is happening now. And this has been quoted a lot in the context of what's happening now. This is a book on foreign interventions, both the right-wing Western and the left-wing liberal Western interventions into India's fault lines. And these
real and imaginary.
Real and imaginary. Taking some fault lines that may have existed but they were not in tension and putting tension there, making conflicts there. And funding some group to be empowered and to be told that your history is full of oppression by those other people and they are not really Indians or you're not really Indians or whatever to make them conflict. And I looked at the institutional lines, the lines of funding. There's a very interesting story on how this started. I was having a lunch in Princeton and with some university people, And this African American gentleman comes in and he's introduced and joins us. And he says, after I tell him I'm from India and all, so he said, I just came back from India. So I said, what was going on? So he said, I'm part of the Afro-Dalit project. So I said, what is this Afro-Dalit project? I never heard of this. So he thought I should know about it. So we started talking and he was very, very nice. Invited me to his office. So I saw a map on his wall. So the Afro-Dalit project, as he explained it, is a project where they are teaching the Dalits of India
that they are a different race.
That you are really Africans.
Racially.
And the oppression of blacks in America maps onto the oppression of Dalits in India. And the non-Dalits of India are really the whites, and the foreigners, the outsiders like the Aryans and whatnot. So this Aryan thing was playing there. I was really concerned. And he had this map which is on the cover of this book, Breaking India, which is this Balkanized stuff. And he was talking about it like, so I thought I should understand who's doing all this. And he was very helpful. He told me that we have this project there, funding from there and whatnot. So I thanked him. I contacted these organizations. And they thought this is some guy who's going to praise us for all the work. I always like to call them and say, I heard you're doing major work in India. And I'm a researcher and journalist and I like to know and whatnot. And they'd send me boxes and boxes of what they're doing. Some would send me videos. Their training they're doing in the villages in India to empower people. And I got shocked at what is going on. So the more material I collected, the more sources it gave me, and soon I had a huge cupboard full of all this kind of material. So then I got some students from the university to scan all this, analyze it, and put some maps together of how this funding is going and so on. And then I decided I'll target South India and look at how this project is playing there, and got some help from the people in South India to help me translate, the Tamil stuff, and put together the end-to-end funding from the Western source, both European and American, going through government, going through church, going through think tanks, going through NGOs, going through academics, and how these nexuses are working together both in the West and in India. And very well, it's a well laid out web of what I call the Breaking India forces. So this book, which is 600 some pages, is on how this whole network is operating. And this network has become more intense now. This network, ironically, this network is the anti-Modi network. It is very interesting.
Absolutely.
This network is concerned that Modi is the person who will dismantle all this. That Modi is the one guy who is coming in the way of this Breaking India project. So this is Breaking India versus Modi going on. That is what's going on right now. So that's why I feel that this particular thesis of mine become very relevant. And by the way, this Breaking India, we just introduced the Hindi version, Bharat Vikhandan. It just came out a day or two ago. We haven't done a formal release yet. And this
it is noteworthy that almost every single foreign funded NGO, whether working on women's issues or environment or caste or tribal issues or any, are all today part of the anti-Modi army.
That's correct.
And have contributed to what you call the fault line study of Indian subcontinent.
And the way I look at this anti-Modi thing is, I am able to say, look, I told you so. I wrote this book years back. I predicted they will do this. Until Modi came, the Breaking India people were having a field day, because it was their puppets and their people running the show, and they had created these cells to go on, creating this mirage of an India that's doing well, but in a sense subverting, in a very insidious way subverting India and its sovereignty. Now there is a chance that somebody comes in who will stop all this from happening, because he's strong, he's tough, and he will just confront.
And he also bridges divides.
Yes.
See, their problem with Modi is not that if he were actually divisive. I think this Breaking India project or the Congress party, which seems to have become one of the patron saints of the Breaking India project.
Yes, of course it is.
They would have embraced Modi with great affection and love.
Then he will do the job for us.
He'll do the job for us, or he will carry forward in the way that we want the Hindu or Hindutva forces to act.
Correct.
He doesn't live up to that stereotype.
Right.
He's actually bridging divides. He doesn't allow riots to take place. He doesn't talk the language of minority versus majority,
Right.
which is what has rattled them completely. They'll be all out of job.
They'll be out of job. So you see, the anti-Modi forces, and I'm jumping ahead now, but the anti-Modi forces are partly India-based, looking for help. Okay, please, Ma Baap, come and help us.
Hey, I mean, the Amartya Sens
they're all the time.
and the entire Jingbang lot
and
in Ivy League universities.
Yes, and the Western patrons saying we got to back our sepoys. I call them sepoys because they're like the modern sepoys.
You remember we had this conversation nearly 10 years ago?
More than 10 years ago.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We shared
We
these concerns.
We shared these concerns.
Almost in the same way.
Yes.
I mean, same language.
This is happening, yes. And I just kept getting deeper into this, and I'm very concerned about it for India, and I'm very concerned that, you know, even in the Hindu organizations, they don't really fully understand this.
Not at all.
They just have a very reactive. I don't think there is enough depth of intellectual study of the whole map. Now the thing is, suddenly from a person was ignored, because in my own experience, when I raised these issues long ago, 20 years ago when I started the foundation, the Hindu organizations poo-pooed me. They said, you are sensationalist, we are building, we build 800 temples in North America. They thought that you build a little temple and this is like a little island, an oasis inside which you can do what you want, so everything is fine. They didn't realize that that's not the public space. And you have to look at what's happening in school textbooks, in media, in academia.
What your children are learning.
What things they're learning, think tanks, policies, you know, and what are they funding. They did not see it that way, did not have a bird's eye view. Today, they consider me as somebody who's pioneered in educating them, but rather than helping me, because I'm not looking for accolades, and I'm looking for, come help me. I mean, I also often tell them that I'm like this bullfight, bull ko maar to dena hai, but everybody's sitting there and applauding and one side or the other side, but in the end the bull, and a bull who, and I saw one bullfight and I'll never see one again in Mexico, they have one bull after another being slaughtered by all these matadors who, you know, who have the power in their hands. The bull can't really do anything. But once in a while there's a bull who won't go easy. He will really fight hard. So there's one bull I remember, chota sa tha, but he hit the horse and knocked the matador off the horse. The crowd cheered this bull because, my God, this is the bull, you know, acha wala bull. Not that they'll go down and help the bull, not that they want to be on his side, but he's put up a good fight for us.
So you're the bull or the matador?
I'm the bull. I often tell these people who come and tell me, what can we do for you? I tell them that, look, basically you praise me and applaud me because I'm a bull giving you entertainment value, good value for your money. You're sitting in the spectator stand and I'm giving you this. But you're not going to come down and be my fellow bull and do the fighting for me. Wo to aap nahi karenge. So this is our problem. The thing has shifted in the sense that they no longer think that I'm a sensationalist making non-issues out of, making big things out of non-issues. Today they think that there's a real issue that he's raising, but they're really not coming down to help me. They are basically replicating, appropriating, copying what I'm doing, just recycling the same thing in their own name, which doesn't help me do the more of the work that I really need to do. So now the third book is Being Different.
Okay.
Being Different. Now Being Different is probably the philosophically deepest book I've done. And that is what is distinct about what I call the Dharma civilization from the Western civilization. And it is a Dharma civilization doing Purva Paksh on the West, reversing the gaze, and looking at Western categories, which I call Western universalism, and showing that they are not really universal, they are particular to their history, their geography, their metaphysics, and showing what are the corresponding Indian categories. So for instance, I show that they have this prophetic lineage, and we have Adhyatmic Rishis, and how they are very different. I show the non-translatability of Sanskrit categories. There are certain Sanskrit categories, and I give 20 examples, where the common English equivalent is a different metaphysics, and it does violence.
Like Dharma and religion.
Dharma and religion, and even soul and Atman and soul. I give all these kind of things. So I show that preserving a certain Sanskrit word brings with it a whole ecosystem of meanings, a whole lot of context that comes in. So even if you can teach a child one new word a week and build 50 word vocabulary in a year, and a couple of 3 years you have 100, 150 words, and say that for the rest of your life, these words, you can speak English, but use these words non-translatively. These words you should not translate. And when somebody tries to replace them, explain why that doesn't work, what the reason, explain logically. You will convert whole your awareness and whole consciousness. So this book being different is on what is different, because if we do not understand what is different, we do not know what is worth defending. We are defending Hinduism.
Sure.
We are concerned that it is being destroyed. But what is this? What is its essence? What are its fundamental categories? So it's a philosophical book. That is that.
Yeah, I've read.
Then the most recent one is Indra's Net. Indra's Net is a critique of a Western thesis that Hinduism is an artificial fabrication of Vivekananda, and it should more appropriately be called Neo-Hinduism. So there's a whole school of Neo-Hinduism which starts, I have a lineage of who starts it, in the West, and then this is brought by Ramila Thapar is the first Indian who starts writing on syndicated moksha article of hers. And then all these Pankaj Mishra types and all these popular writers who say that this thing doesn't even exist, it's not even a legitimate thing, it is a fabrication for political purposes. Vivekananda started it to fight the British, and then later on the Hindutva took it over to fight minorities and Muslims and all these kind of people. So this is actually a very deep book for today's use, because the attack on Hinduism is based on this kind of a philosophical argument, and the book goes through the whole Purva Paksha, what they are saying, and part 2 is the Uttar Paksha, saying that here is why it is not correct. That everything Vivekananda does is a revival of pre-colonial things that already existed. So he's reviving those things and not appropriating them from the British. The allegation is that Karma Yoga is actually an appropriation of Christian charity, which didn't exist, and he had an inferiority complex. And Raj Yoga is an appropriation of Western science, because Indians didn't have a scientific mindset, so he said we have this yogic science. So all of this I'm taking apart one by one.
It's like Gandhi owes his civil disobedience to Emerson and Thoreau.
Although the other way around, Emerson himself was a transcendentalist who read Indian stuff and gave up Christianity and took over. His origin of his thinking is Indian stuff, and he acknowledged that.
But here there are many of us who are bending themselves backward to prove that Gandhi owed it to Western civilization.
That is right. You see, when an Indian cites a Western source, it doesn't necessarily mean that the origin is Western civilization. The argument has to be taken further. Where did that Western source get it from? And if the Western source is a distorted, diluted, adapted version of what that person got it from an Indian source to begin with, then it is just a circular loop. So it's like, if neem gets turned into a product that is patented, then if I'm taking a neem product tomorrow and using it, I'll be told I'm taking a Western product. But that Western product came from India in the first place. So this is a large part of our work is this, what I call the U-turn theory, where a whole lot of things go from India into the West, get repackaged and sold back to India. That's the U-turn. And our people buy it because they're so much enamored and so much in glamour.